Hello everyone, we're going to begin our section on relationships with a lesson on perception. So this is continuing on some of the information we talked about before with the mental health disorders. We're going to cover a couple more of those. We're also going to talk about basic factors that affect perception, because before you can enter into a relationship with someone, you need to know what is affecting your own perceptions. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about. Let's get started. So you've heard the saying, oh, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. In point of fact, although that's, it's a good call to empathy, it is impossible to perceive the same stimulus, the same event, exactly the same as another person. I think we all know that, right? For example, well, I assume most of us have two eyeballs, right? You can actually perceive things differently depending on which of your eyeballs you're using to take in information. For example, I happen to know this because one of my eyeballs is slightly colorblind. So if I cover one eye, I can see color better than if I cover the other eye. All of us have these kinds of things that affect our perceptions. And we need to know that about ourselves, and we need to know that about other people so that we can be in relationship with other people in an understanding way. So, beyond the fact we all use different sensory organs like eyes, ears, nose, to perceive the world around us, we all have different brains. This is obvious, right? Some person's brain might have been affected by prenatal exposure to drugs. That's going to change how they are able to perceive the world around them. Whereas another person's brain might be affected by a genetic disorder that's going to affect the way they perceive the world around them. And all of us take in the information that our many, many billions of neurons give us every moment of every day, and we filter it. And we have to filter it because if we were just immediately 100% aware of every single impulse from every single neuron, we'd go crazy. Our brain is not meant to be able to pay attention to that much information. So there's vast swaths of your nerves that you're ignoring just listening to this. For example, were you paying attention to exactly how your toes felt when I said that? Chances are you probably weren't, okay, unless something was biting your toe or whatever. We discard all that information that is not deemed important. And that's good to know, and it helps us, get by from our day to day. So how does our brain decide importance? If you've ever taken a walk with a little kid, hey, look at this, hey, look at this, hey, look at this. And that's because for them, a lot of things are new. They're 100% new, and their brain has to pay attention to it because it's all new. And for another person who might have seen that sidewalk a million times already, it's not new. Okay? It's old hat. My brain's already checked it out, decided we don't find it important, and we don't pay attention to it. Same thing for your comforter on your bed. At one point, you might have woken up, taken a look at your comforter, noticed the thread count, noticed the colors on it, just paid really close attention to it, noticed the way it felt. That might have happened at one time, but I can guarantee you don't spend that kind of attention on your bed cover every morning. Okay, your brain chucks that information, all the sensations you get from it as aside as unimportant. We know what this is. It's not, essential for survival to pay attention to the thread count today. So this is why you have situations where if one person growing up has learned to pay more attention to a certain thing than another, one person may become hypervigilant versus another person not even noticing. So for example, let's say you have a child who one of the parents is abusive. And in this particular situation, the child learns through experience. Remember, this is what our brain has to do, is we have to learn. We aren't born knowing everything. The child learns through past experiences that it's generally a good indicator of their parents' mood by how they put down their briefcase when they come home from work. If they put it down angrily or slam it down or curse or whatever, That could be an indicator of a very bad night about to happen. Another person who may never have been abused by their parent and so has never spent any amount of time thinking about how their parent put down their briefcase wouldn't even notice it happening. So one person gets hyper vigilant and something becomes a trigger. So they might see a random stranger putting down a suitcase and immediately get triggered and freak out, start to panic attack, whatever you want to imagine could happen. The other person's like, how, what are you upset about? I don't get it, right? And that's because there's a lot of things that happen to us when we have been traumatized as children. We're going to spend a whole lesson on trauma. So this is just a quick heads up. We're going to spend more time talking about this. Your neurotransmitters get damaged if you are subjected to trauma as a young child. Okay, your brain waves start not being what they should be if you are abused, especially as a young child or as an adult. Talk about warfare, your immune system, your nervous system. There's a lot of, you guys can go over the Nearpod code and read these if you want. There's a lot of information out there about how trauma physically impacts us, and it's serious stuff. So there's a lot of things that affect our own perception and the perceptions of others. One time I was at work and I, because of my American background, thought nothing of leaning back in a chair and putting my legs up, crossing my legs in a certain position. And another coworker happened to think, because of his social learning and his culture, it was a different culture than my culture, that the way I was sitting was disrespectful. Now, in my culture, it wasn't. In his, it was. His perception, because he didn't take time to think about it particularly, we had this conversation later and we were able to kind of figure out what was going on. His perception was that I knew he was perceiving it as disrespectful and I was doing it anyways. Whereas my perception, being a stranger to his cultural expectations, I had zero thoughts of any of that when I crossed my legs a certain way. Okay? This is something you really run up against in cross-cultural, but it's true on a small scale for every other human you interact with, because they are their own little microcosm of culture. Nobody else has experienced life exactly the same way they have, and nobody else can truly know all of their life experiences. So this means we should all give each other some grace. Instead of assuming, oh, this person did this because they know it irritates me and blah, 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 say, hey, maybe they don't realize that what they're doing is problematic. Okay? So let's talk about some basic ways that our perceptions can be different from other people's. So the first one I'm going to talk about is your gender difference. Now I'm talking about your biological gender. And I want to make a distinction on that. This is not a political discussion. This is a biological discussion. Your gender or sex, whatever you want to call it, male and female, this starts from the moment egg and sperm meet. And every single cell of your body is either going to be XX or XY from that point on. And you can never change this. You will be that biological gender in every cell of your body for the rest of your life. That's not a bad thing. It's who you are, okay? However, your gender identity is right now, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your biological gender for the rest of this discussion. So I want you to understand that. All right, so one of the things I found really fascinating was learning that a laboratory can take a slice, obviously from a dead male brain and a dead female brain. People don't usually have their brains having sliced open, right? It can take a slice from a male brain and a female brain, and they can tell with 100% accuracy which gender that brain slice came from. And that is because, to a foundational level, male and female brains are different. They're not just, sorted out differently and okay, your neurons look like, they're actually fundamentally different. And so this is true for everything in the body. You might not have known some of these things. So let's see some big examples. So for example, the male retina in the eyeball is thicker than the female retina. So why and what does that matter? So let's see how we see. I'm going to show you a picture. Okay, so here is a schematic of the human eyeball. So you see, I'm not sure if you guys can see my little arrow here. All right, here's the pupil. This is the black thing at the middle of your eye. And this is where light comes in. Okay, you've got your colors and all the rest of that on your iris and all that good stuff. So light comes in the pupil and it goes all the way to the back of the eyeball. By the way, this is filled with liquid. Goes through the liquid to the back of the eyeball. And then if you look here, here says light. This is hitting the back wall of your eyeball, which is called the retina. And you'll notice that there are nerve cells here, and then they're connected to rod and cone cells at the back. And you don't need to know exactly what's going on here to realize that this is kind of the basic way everyone sees light hits nerves. The nerves transmit signals to the brain, right? I think we all know that signals are transmitted by nerves. What changes between male and female here is that for some reason, and we can't explain why, males have a different number of certain kinds of cells than females. And females, obviously we're all going to add up to 100. Males might have 60% M cells, 40% P. Females might have the exact opposite, 60% P, 40% M. Doesn't matter the exact numbers. What you need to know is that the M cells are motion detectors. And that is what men have more of. They can tell movement and direction of something. Now, the P cells help answer the question, what is it that I'm seeing moving? That's because they're your texture and color cells. So male retinas are thicker or bigger than female because males have more M cells, which are bigger cells. And P cells are smaller cells, so their retina is thinner. This isn't really, I don't want you to get caught up in M cells and P cells or whatever. The basic idea I want you to know is that because of the fundamental biological sex, all males, all males can see movement better than color or texture, and all females can see color and texture better than movement. And if you compare a male and a male is going to be able, simply by the number of nerve cells that they have, to see movement. Any male will be able to see movement better than any female. And any female will be able to see color or texture better than any male. This is a biological difference. This is why girls talk about the 20 different colors of pink, and the guys are like, pink is pink, okay? It also explains this rather fundamental phenomenon. Okay, you guys can look at the joke. It's very well known. So at the top it says, men be like, babe, where's ketchup? And 10 minutes later, the male says, babe, you see that dude sniping over there? Okay, so obviously I have to explain the joke in case you guys don't get it, but the husband opens the fridge, can't see the ketchup right in front of his face. It's right there, it's red, okay? Whereas he's playing a sniping game on the computer and his eyes are detecting tiny bit of movements that the game is showing him, whereas a female watcher might not even see that movement. What that means is not that she's not paying attention. Her eye literally doesn't have the nerves to see it. This is something that my husband and I have noticed driving, especially later at night. He sees all the animals on the side of the road, as far as I can tell. And I'm like, wait, what deer? What rabbit? What did I almost hit? I don't see those things on the side of the road when I'm driving. He does. He's like, that deer that was just 40 yards that way in the bush hiding. Like, no, of course I didn't see that deer, right? Very different abilities. So you can have fun with this kind of memes, and it is kind of fun to play around with our physical abilities a little bit. But this is just one example of this very big difference between male and female. So in the Nearpod student class code that I gave, you can put your response to this question. Assuming a hunter-gatherer society, which gender would be best suited for which task, hunting or gathering, and why, just from the way our eyes are designed? What do you think? Okay, being able to tell the difference between poison ivy and not poison ivy, being able to see a deer in the bush. What do you guys think? Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is hearing. And this again, this is not about fairness. This is not about gender equality. This is simply about biological fact. And it is a biological fact that XX girls, biological girls, hear better in the voice range of sound for the human voice. So that's what that means. There's a range of sound where almost all human voices fall into. And girls can hear that range better than boys, starting from day one outside the womb. Obviously, we don't check their hearing inside the womb. It'd be squishy and wet and yeah. But there's, in hospitals nowadays, they have these, I'm not sure if you've had a baby recently, probably not. But if you did, the first day, one of the things they do is they take the baby and they put earphones kind of on the baby, and somehow it's some kind of voodoo sciencey magic. They play sounds and they can actually tell from day one what sounds the child can hear and which ones they can't. And I don't know how it works. But anyways, the testing that they've been able to do discovered that girls as a whole, we're not talking about the hearing impaired, as a whole, girls hear the voice range of sounds better. Now, I believe boys hear lower tones better. I know for a fact my husband and I have very, very different voice range sounds. I hear the human range, the voice better, and he hears things that are really, really low. And sometimes I don't even hear it at all, what he's hearing, until it gets louder and then I can hear it. Now, the difference between male and female in the hearing abilities, the difference gets bigger as you get older. Okay, so here's an example. If you take a so-called normal 17-year-old young woman and a so-called normal 43-year-old man, they are going to have a 100-fold difference of loudness perception. That means, let's say a book is dropped off the counter. The girl is going to hear it 100 times louder than the man. Okay, it's going to be quiet to him and loud to her. So if they're having a conversation, a 17-year-old girl and a 43-year-old man, in the girl's hearing, her acute sense of hearing of his voice, it might feel like the man is yelling at her. But to him, he's just talking with his normal voice volume. He can't hear himself as well as she can hear him. Okay, this is true obviously in kindergarten. So one of the things that's just statistically true, most kindergarten teachers, not all, most kindergarten teachers tend to be female. Most kindergarten age boys cannot hear the voice range of sound as well as the girls, and the higher woman's voice is also going to be especially difficult for them to be able to hear. And so if you have boys in kindergarten listening to a normal, feminine, higher pitched voice, they're not going to be able to hear her very well, and they're probably going to start tuning her out, leading to them getting distracted and bored and causing mischief. This could definitely probably be a large cause for why boys have a reputation for just being more whatever in kindergarten than girls. It's a hearing issue, partially. There's other things at play as well. Now, they took the same kindergarten age class, and if you put a male teacher in the kindergarten class teaching and his booming kind of voice, the girls and the boys are going to have no problem hearing him and they're going to be fine. The girls are going to feel like he's yelling at them because they can hear him much better than their male cohorts. Okay, so this is very important to know how much this is going to affect every single part of your life. Another study found that 11-year-old girls and boys, the girls were distracted by noise levels 10 times softer than what distracted the boys. So when I've been seeing this in classes, somebody sits there and starts tap, 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 tapping on the table, and the girls are the ones who all turn around and give the evil eye. Like, would you stop that already? Stop chewing so loud. Stop crinkling your paper so loud. Stop, doing your pen so loud, right? It's always the girls who get seriously irritated with these things. And it's because, although they don't know it, they can hear better than the boy who's doing it. Okay, that's why. So do you think, pause for thought, and this is something you're going to respond to on the Nearpod code, do you think that being better able from birth to hear the human voice compared to boys would give girls an advantage in learning language, meaning acquiring language earlier and understanding language earlier and being able to verbalize better? So what do you think? Put it on your Nearpod code. Now, the last thing I'm going to look at for gender biological differences is feelings. So here we have the human brain, kind of a funny looking thing. It's amazing that that's what we're all using right now to listen to this. But now that we have MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging, we can take a look at the brain while it's working and not destroy the person's brain. Yay. So what they found is that they've done research on where they do people's MRIs while they portray unpleasant things for them to look at and consider. And then they watch to see which part of the brain lit up to process that unpleasant emotion once the signal was received by the brain. So they showed the same stimulus to males and females and to young children and older adults. And according to this research, all young children, male or female, had their amygdala, which is part of the so-called primitive brain. It's not primitive, but it's called the primitive brain or the reptilian brain. That is where their unpleasant emotions were being processed. Now, the language centers are nowhere near the amygdala. And so if you try to ask young children about unpleasant things or things that happened to them when they were young that were not happy, they have a hard time talking about the emotions, okay, because they experience them, but in an area of the brain that is not close to the language centers of the brain. The amygdala is your kind of fight, flight, or freeze section. Now, the MRIs on adolescent, and adult males found that as adults, males continue to process unpleasant emotions in the amygdala. It doesn't change. So all children, and then going into adulthood, all males have their unpleasant emotion center processed by the amygdala. What's the difference? Females, around the age of adolescence or puberty, actually that processing of unpleasant emotion moves. It moves. And of course, you have no control over this. But what happens is that somehow during puberty, during adolescence, the part of the brain that is in charge of processing unpleasant things, unpleasant feelings, moves up to the cerebral cortex. That's the kind of folded looking thing at the top. That's also where the thinking and verbal part of the brain is. So this means when they hit this stage of development, females become much better able to verbalize their emotions. Talk, 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 talk. They can do it all day long because it's in the right part of the brain connected to their verbal abilities. So here we have our females from adolescence on verbalizing their unpleasant emotions, while the males, just because of the brain structure, still have all their unpleasant emotions being processed in the amygdala. This doesn't mean that either males or females have less emotion, okay? They're both processing the same amount of emotion. They're processing it in different places. So girls literally can talk more about their feelings than boys can. Boys literally cannot verbalize their unpleasant emotions the same as a girl can. I'm not saying they can't talk about it at all, but they can't do it as well. This is a biological difference. So here we have the age-old question, why won't you talk to me about how you feel? You know, it's in all the teen dramas and everything. 'Cause the boy can't, okay? Give him a break. He's dealing with amygdala, primitive brain thought. So he can feel those unpleasant emotions, but he can't necessarily verbalize why he's so upset. Okay, so give him a break, girls. Just less talking. So these three simple major differences, sight, hearing, and emotions, are only some of the gender differences we experience. There are many more. You guys are free to look up more information online. I have some resources. If you're interested, I can give it to you. But like I said, XX versus XY, this affects us down to a cellular level. Every single cell of our body is affected by these differences. Okay, and this is why relationships between male and female can be very challenging, but also very rewarding. It's always rewarding to learn something from a different perspective. For example, driving at night. I would much rather have my husband be driving at night than me, because he sees better than I do. Okay, and so it's a complementary, one person's strength, another person's weakness, you combine them together, you complement each other, and it's a good thing. However, it also means that there are some things a person of the opposite gender will never get. They won't get it. They just won't get it. Don't try to make them get it, because they're not going to get it, okay? Develop same gender friendships in order to have somebody to talk to about all that stuff that the other gender never gets. It's important. So you also have this major book market, which, you know, I think I picked the three of the more famous ones. Men are like waffles, women are like spaghetti, or Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or the Love and Respect series. Okay, these are books you can read if you want, talking about male-female gender differences and how you have that affecting your relationships. All right, so besides the fact of your biological gender that you're born with, what else factors into how we perceive things? All right, so the rest of the lecture is going to be about disorders. So different ways different brains are, other than neurotypical, that process information differently. So ones we're going to talk about today are ADHD, ASD, HSP, SPD. Okay? So you can look up, there's other ones, but these are the main ones we're going to talk about. So ASD is the first one we're talking about, autism spectrum disorder. And that's what ASD stands for, obviously. It's a new term, but they've kind of gone through a variety of terms to describe, and they finally decided this is a spectrum. There's some people who are one side of the spectrum, some people are on the other. There is no typical autistic person. It's a variety of symptoms, mild to severe. So this is the best description I found of it on the internet. So, quote, you could think of a person with autism as having an imbalanced set of senses. Some senses may be turned up too high and some turned down too low. As a result, the data that comes in tends to be distorted, and it's very hard to perceive a person's environment accurately. This is why we're talking about ASD now versus talking about it with the mental disorder section, because it's a perception issue. So one of the main issues in relationships where ASD is a factor is social perception. Autism spectrum disorder affects how you are perceiving the world around you, and one of the things that they have a difficult time perceiving is they do not necessarily perceive other people's social cues. Those little cues that we learn as a child mean this means this person's, when they're closing their eyes a certain way, this is what they mean. Autistic people, because of that problem with the perception, they don't learn those skills naturally. Also, they have a term called mental inflexibility, where an autistic brain simply doesn't seem as flexible as a non-autistic brain. So I'm going to give you an example with the next picture. Autistic people can't easily see the two different pictures sandwiched in one. So So here's the picture of two faces, actually it's the same face, but two pictures of the same face have been superimposed on top of each other. So you should be able to see the man's profile from the side and then half of his face looking straight at you. Now, not everyone finds this easy. What you might want to do is take your hand and put it over the screen, covering his ear, and that might help your brain be able to interpret that better. And again, this is something that autistic brains have a little bit harder time dealing with. However, I just want to point out, autistic brains tend to see patterns easier than other brains. This is probably because their temporal and occipital brain lobes are more active than so-called neurotypical brains. So they have a great capacity for certain kinds of visual tasks. So some benefits, right? So here we have autistic spectrum disorder in relationship. Certain factors are going to be affecting how healthy and how able someone is to have a relationship. Past trauma might make people have a harder time. For example, a soldier coming home from wartime with PTSD might have a harder time with a relationship. Same thing is true for autistic. Some people may have a harder time with autism having relationships than others. It's not necessarily true. But there is a myth out there that autistic spectrum people do not have the same emotions as others. And this probably comes because they do not express their emotions on their faces the same way other people do. That's social cues we were talking about. Autistic people don't see other people's social cues as easily, and they also don't express their own social cues as easily. And unfortunately, they also get a double dose of negative emotions like depression and anxiety. So, this is one of those, you really hit the jackpot here. No, it's not. It's not fun having autism. However, it is not a bad thing either. It's a different way of having a brain. It just comes with certain challenges. Okay, that's basically my one thing. If you can get it from this lesson, these things just make certain relationship factors more challenging. They do not mean you cannot be in relationship. So this is something that Autism Signs in Adults, one of my friends posted. I thought that it would be good for you. You can look on this at the Nearpod, have a little bit more information, or press pause on the video. I'm not going to read all of these, but here's some signs: behavioral, social, sensory, and communication, that would be what an adult would look like with autism. Okay. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the highly sensitive person. So this is not listed in the DSM. That's the go-to in America for disorder definitions. It's not listed as a disorder. Who knows if it really is a disorder or not, but some studies have shown up to 20% of the population fit this criteria. So the highly sensitive person seems to be basically, if you want to talk about spectrums, right? The highly sensitive person seems to be on the high end of the spectrum for stimulation. Good and bad stimulation, they tend to be more sensitive, or they notice it more. All right, so what this means is that the highly sensitive person's brain, because they're paying attention to more than your average person, they get overwhelmed easier. They get overstimulated easier. An HSP toddler, you're going to be able to tell because they're going to really lose their ever-loving minds quickly if they're presented with too much stimulation. In a similar way, autistic toddlers have these kind of decompensation melting down. You take them into Target and maybe the lights are too bright, okay? So it's going to cause them to lose it a little bit. So although this is a disadvantage, it's also a bit of an advantage, because what this means is that a highly sensitive person on this higher end of the spectrum of noticing things, they also can tend to, quote, be more perceptive of certain slight signs another person might not notice. For example, body cues. situational awareness. An HSP person might be more situationally aware. They might be able to read other people's body language better. Some people have accused HSPs of being able to be mind readers. No, this is not this is not the mind reading superpower. I'm sorry. It's the getting overwhelmed easily superpower. So here's some highly sensitive person questions. Are you easily overwhelmed by such things as bright lights, strong smells, coarse fabrics, or loud noises like sirens nearby? Do you get rattled when you have a lot to do in a short amount of time? Do you make a point of avoiding violent movies and TV shows? Do you need to withdraw during busy days into bed or a darkened room or some other place where you can have privacy and relief from stimulation? Okay. Do you make it a high priority, probably unconsciously, to arrange your life to avoid upsetting or overwhelming situations? That's something you might have to think about. See if you're doing that. Do you happen to notice delicate scents, tastes, works of art? You tend to just be perceptive about those things and be like, did you really see that sunset? And the other person's like, what? It's just a sunset, right? You might be more perceptive because you're paying more attention to certain things. And then last two questions are, do you have a rich and complex inner life? And when you were a child, did your parents or teachers see you as sensitive or shy? There's just going to go back to this real quick. The highly sensitive person, I'm giving you a link of more information about this if you want to look at it further yourself. Okay, moving on to the next one, the sensory processing disorder. So the people with this disorder, they have no problem with their eyes, ears, nose, or whatever. Their senses are fine. It's what their brain does or doesn't do with their sensory input that's the problem. So their processing of sensation is a problem. So generally speaking, there's two categories here, sensory seeking versus sensory sensitive. So you have sensory seekers. So they have a boy and a girl. That doesn't mean that they're going to particularly be male or female. So here's the boy. I'm not going to read every single thing, but you could look at it. Sensory seekers love sensation. They seek out sensation, especially big sensations like bear hugs, jumping around, crashing into things. They love this. Whereas a sensory sensitive person, don't touch me. Don't make me go on, bright light areas. Do not tickle me. I do not like being barefoot. Do not touch my hair. Last time I talked about this lesson, I had quite a few people who were like, okay, now I know this is me. This is all me, And some of the sensory seekers are like, yeah, this is more me. So if you have one of these things, you can look up more information on them and see maybe this is you. Maybe that just nobody noticed it about yourself, but you're noticing it now. Now, finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about stimulation as a thing. So stimulation means something that stimulates your nerves. So it's a sensation. All of the disorders I've talked about, and they're not necessarily disorders, right? And I haven't talked about ADHD yet. That's going to be a lesson where you watch some videos on that this week. The stimulation buffer for these people is going to be smaller or fill up more quickly than your so-called neurotypical brain. Everyone has a buffer. But for example, if you're a highly sensitive person, you notice the texture of every leaf. That's going to take up a lot of processing. It's not going to leave you a lot of extra time for processing other things. All right, so you can become overstimulated easily. So for example, some people tend to be more overstimulated by fluorescent lights. If you're that kind of person, sitting in a fluorescent light environment like a school could be very overstimulating and upsetting to you on an unconscious level you don't even realize, and you don't know why you feel so relieved to walk out of the school at the end of the day. It could just be the lighting. The lighting could be bugging you on a subconscious level and you don't even know. Okay? So some symptoms of sensory overload. That means your sensory buffer is getting full. You don't know what to do with it. You can't focus very well. You've got too much sensory input. This is something that's very true of ADHD. ADHD brains tend to focus on a lot of different things, and so they can't easily focus on one particular thing. There's so much competing for their attention. Extreme irritability. You could just get so annoyed because your sensory overload is full, your buffer's full. You might be wanting to cover your ears or shield your eyes. You might have fear, stress, feel wound up. You might be more sensitive to textures or fabrics, okay? All of these things are signs that you are getting overloaded sensationally, and that means you need to take a breather. So only time and quiet can fix overstimulation. You need to let your brain buffer get back down, okay? What that means is you have to give your brain time to process all of those stimulations and then clear the buffer. And once you've cleared your buffer, you're able to take in more sensation again. Every single person needs to know what your own stim level tolerance is, and all of us need to make room for downtime, because it's possible to get overstimulated no matter what kind of brain you have. This is true for introverts and extroverts. So I want you guys to take this question and fill it in on your Nearpod. What bothers you the most? Too much noise, too much light, too much movement, too much something else? And what is your ideal downtime? And one thing you need to know about your buffer is that it's also affected by your internal weather, your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions. So if you had something really upsetting happen, like, I don't know, a global pandemic, maybe your brain is processing that. Maybe you're processing, what does this mean for graduation? What does this mean for my life? What does this mean for my family? What about my father or my mother's job? There's a lot of stuff you might be thinking about inside. And these things take up buffer space. And so if somebody comes over and knocks your pile of Legos over or something, you might lose your ever-loving mind because that was the last straw. You have less buffer. So when you have a losing your mind sensation, that's called decompensation. If you really lose it, not just like, God, get out of my space, but like, I'm going to absolutely lose my mind. That's decompensation. And often it looks like anger explosions. So we talked about that. We talked about the anger iceberg. It's a lot easier to explode in anger than it is to burst out crying. But you could decompensate by bursting out crying and yelling at the same time. Who knows, right? Mix it up a little bit. Just kidding. This is not a pleasant thing to happen. I've had it happen to me several times. It's not fun. Your ability to cope is no longer there. You need to de-stress like now. Okay, so normal decompensation. This is something that happens to all of us. You might call throwing a tantrum. You can see a toddler decompensating in a grocery store. Maybe the lights are too bright. Maybe the meal was too late. Maybe they haven't had a nap yet and they lose it. That's a decompensation spell. So this is just an emotional release when you can't cope anymore. Your buffer is full. So it's a big red flag. You need to get away. You need to take a nap. You need to journal. You need to figure out what's going on and why are you decompensating right now. So conclusion, this is kind of conclusion for the whole thing. I know this was a longer lesson, but I wanted to get everything done in one go. Your perceptions will always differ fundamentally from others. We talked about the genetic basis. We talked about gender. We talked about various brain disorders that can affect it. We also talked about how trauma can affect how you react. All of these things are going to affect your perceptions. All of us can get overloaded. And the thing is, you have to realize that everyone else is in the same boat. We're all trying to get through life and getting overstimulated and dealing with all this internal weather stuff. We're all having these things affect us. And so if you see someone else doing something and you're like, you're doing that on purpose, or why are you doing this, or whatever, they might not be doing it on purpose. You have to always assume your own perceptions of other people are flawed because you don't know. You don't know. Okay? This is just something good to remind yourself about at all times. Give people grace. You don't know what they're dealing with. And this is a good thing to kind of keep in mind. That's why I did it before we hit the rest of the relationship stuff, because this is going to affect all of your relationships in life. And so just keep in mind your perceptions are not necessarily going to be the same as other people's, and you have a good start. Okay? Talk to you guys later. Take care.